Hi, and thank you for coming to the Bible Nation podcast. It's 2024. This is season 4 for the Bible Nation podcast. We appreciate you tuning in. Last season, I had a stroke at the end of the year and was on air with a patch on my eye, with pain. But praise the Lord, that's over with, and I have healed tremendously. Excited to be back for 2024. So many great things going on in society, so many important things to talk about. As always, I'm here with Pastor Jason Georges of Emmanuel Baptist Church in Corona, Michigan. Pastor Jason, welcome to 2024.
Yeah, we're here. We made it. You made it.
Yeah, we made it. We made it. You know, a new year always brings about like hope and a new calendar and new hopes and new goals and things like that. And you and I both were like, let's be fresh. Let's refresh in ourselves. Let's refresh in the congregation. Let's refresh in, our ministries and even the Bible Nation Society. But it seems like we've come into 2024 with a dark, dark cloud, kind of on every arena. And I call this episode 1 of season 4, War 2024, the vulnerability of our republic in 2024. And this is not just something that's coming from the Christian right. It's something that from the left, right, center, internationally, nationally, people feel like, something's dark. Since COVID, things have kind of stepped out, like we were off kilter. And so things are not the same. They're not normal. We're in this, downfall, so to speak, of society, of our political systems, of our education systems, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's something I think we should just hit head on and address because we've been in these cycles before, and even in antiquity, even in modernity, and you have to deal with that. And the church will always exist until Jesus comes. Mm-hmm. And the church exists in communist countries, in dictatorial countries. And we take it for granted in the United States. We have all these liberties and freedoms, but we might as a church have to start adapting and doubling down on our faith and doubling down on our hope. And even in the dark days, stay with it, and not compromise. And so I thought it would be good to talk about these things. What are we standing up for? The ability, the freedom to do what's right as God defines that right.
God's the ultimate author of liberty.
We don't want government to stand between us and our freedom to do what is right.
I wanted to start off with less than a minute of video by Victor Davis Hanson on how really the center's not holding. Something that, the wheels are coming off the bus. And this is a good intro to our discussion today.
A lot of centrifugal forces are going on at once now with all these Palestinian protests. Here in California, we had the National Cemetery in Los Angeles, Veterans Cemetery, defaced with graffiti that got a lot of people mad. Golden Gate Bridge was cut down. And then you have this pathetic testimony of these 3 university presidents, the Claudine Gay pledge. It just all coalescing in people in ESG, DEI, everybody's saying, ESG, DEI, I just want out of it. The center's not holy, Megan, and I think you can see that abroad. You see it with Lloyd Austin. You see that something's wrong in the country where people feel that they're exempt from accountability and they can freelance, they can do anything they want, whether on the crime level, smash and grab, or going into LA and Compton, destroying a bakery with complete exemption, or and I think people are just saying, you know what? We either have a country and civilization or...
That's pretty good. He's been talking in that vein for a long time. He seems kind of like a nervous Nelly. But really, he's addressing what the perspectives of the left and the right are really both talking about. Politico, which is kind of the leftist side of things, in their online magazine recently just printed, "Why the World is Betting Against American Democracy. Ambassadors to Washington warn that GOP Democratic divide is endangering America's national security." And usually diplomats don't want to, they don't want to, make comment on American democracy. But the whole article is basically saying that the USA is a fat buffalo trying to take a nap as hungry wolves approach. I can hear the champagne bottles corks popping in Moscow. It's like Christmas every day. So it's like the wolves are circling. It's like that they've always said this is how we're going to fall apart, and they're watching it happen. And so I thought, well, let's address that because that's probably the best way to fix things, right? If there's a pain or a cancer, let's try to address it. Let's pray about it. and let's try to address it with hope, even in our own souls. And so, the Bible Nation exists to address the culture with scriptural ideals. And so I call this War 2024, not just because of the shooting wars, which we'll talk about, but because of just the war in life. It's just a war to get up and to deal with your finances and to deal with people and things. So I thought we would deal with it in that regard. And I thought we'd start off by talking about political war. 2024, man, it's like 24/7 politics. I'm already sick of it, and it's only mid-January. And so, it looks like November is going to be a Trump-Biden thing again. And we can probably really hit that again, maybe September, October in our podcasting. But it seems like it's already there, and it's already nasty. And so anybody MAGA is a threat. And, the media is being weaponized. The courts are being weaponized. The justice system is being weaponized. Whoever's in power weaponizes those things against the left or the right. It's like you're communist or you're fascist, and we're going at each other. And it just creates a war in society. It's a division of society. I think it's even in the churches. It's even in the churches where you've got, a divide between that. And it's tough because a pastor, you can't tell your congregation how to vote. You can't necessarily go out and endorse and say you got to do this to be a member here or something like that. But
I don't know if we can. It's just there's no one worthy of that endorsement.
Yeah, there's nobody worthy of that endorsement. But at the same time, I'm not going to take responsibility for the presidency
Right.
that I say how you vote. I'll tell you how I vote. I'll put a sign in my yard, and you can know how to do that. But I think even churches are going to feel that more and more. So you have a lot of evangelicals who are MAGA, crazy. And then you got others who are like, I don't know, like I can't vote for that guy in clear conscience, or I can't get behind him, in the same way, even though he might be a better, worse choice, than say a Biden is concerned. And so the other thing is the safe election process. Are we going to have a safe election process? And so there's battles over that. Some people think we need to make it easier for everybody, and so you should be able to have a Facebook ID that allows you to vote online. And there's other people who are the opposite, saying, no, it's one day, one paper ballot, one ID, thumbprint, ink on the finger, and if you can't make it, tough. So there's two different extremes on warring on that, and even the electoral process. And so, there's merit in all those arguments, because we do live in a technocracy where it might be easier to get a better result in the vote, or a truer result in the vote, but then it's possible almost to skew it more. So we have to discuss that. We have to deal with the realities of it. But there's going to be a war this year in that regards. And whoever wins, it's going to be narrow. And it's going to go back to, was it a safe election? And we might have another January 6th, whether it's planned or, faked or whatever. It's going to anger people. And there's threats.
Or it's going to leave them uncertain.
It's going to leave them.
It's going to leave them in doubt.
And that's kind of where we're at today.
And that's the real tragedy of January 6th, is
Right.
it left half the country in doubt of the accuracy or authenticity of what took place.
If Trump was going to take a stand that this was wrong, he should have done it all the way. But to put one toe in and then blame everybody else and let everybody take the fall, it doesn't show great leadership on his part, and leaves himself to be indicted, left and right. But then all of a sudden, what do? They put up barriers and gates around Washington, D.C. for months and months and months. I mean, those are going to go back up again, and it's going to look like warfare. And our enemies or our competitors, culturally, internationally, they see that and they sniff blood in the water. And so politics is, war by other means, right? And so it always has that warfare. But it seems to me that it's virulent, it's violent. There's no respect on either side. Even when Obama was elected, I thought, well, I didn't like, he said, I'm going to fundamentally change America. I didn't like that he had no foreign policy except this pro-Shia ideal of changing the lines in the Middle East. I didn't like any of that, but I did see the poetry in it, and that, black Americans, they got a black president in a way that shows something about America. So there was a beautiful poetry to it, and then you had to respect it, and there was a peaceful change, of power in that regard. But it seems like that's leaving altogether, whether it be, Trump's fault or Biden's fault or whatever. It just seems like it's more virulent. In this particular election, it does concern me how it's going to go leading up to and on the day of and then following an inauguration. So to me, that's an issue that I'm going to pray about. I care about that aspect of our liberty. And so I'm going to pray and fast. Lord, I love our country and what it's done. It allows missions, it allows religious liberty, it allows all these things. And so I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose it politically. I don't want to lose it culturally. And so, I'm going to pray about that. And to me, that just brings about the vulnerability of our republic. We love our Constitution, our forefathers, and our story. But it's not perfect. It's not invulnerable. There's vulnerabilities to it. And over time, there was going to be cracks. And we're there. Mm-hmm. I think last season, we talked about the next America and what the ideas are there about how the Constitution can be changed or interpreted or whatever. And I think this year is going to bring about a real vulnerability and even force a split in the evangelical realm. Because evangelicals now are going to be forced to choose one of two evils, a lesser evil. And so evangelicals aren't going to be standing tall. And, we see them sometimes placating, compromising, gushing, rather than being measured, limited, or even outspoken. Mm-hmm. And, it's hard to deal with a guy like President Trump, because he'll take your love and your adoration and then he'll spit you out when he thinks you're disloyal or whatever else, so it's really tough, because right now he might be our best hope in those things. But if you see dangers in that, then, you're part of that divide.
Right.
What's going on?
Well, what did the opening video that we shared really talk about? Yeah. It was describing the breakdown of civil society. Yeah. And of course, the chink in our republic, the known fissures, the founders knew it, that this republic can only be maintained by righteous people. Yes. Or at least in the context of what we're talking about here, civilization can only survive with civilized people. Yes. And so what he was describing of what's taking place, the lawlessness, people just breaking into I mean, I witnessed it here, and even in our community, people shoplifting, and the workers are powerless to almost stop them from doing it, from walking out.
The corporations are saying, just let it happen.
Right. It because of the litigation and all the, of course, we're paying for that because it's reflected in the prices. Yeah. But if you can't be a nation of the rule of law, and if we can't have civil society, then we can't have a civilization. Right. We can't, and that's what we're seeing right now, and that's what we're noticing is the breakdown of the civilization. And kind of in your intro, the idea there, what is different than Americans are sensing today, right now. And so far, we've talked about this political upheaval, because I don't think anyone is satisfied with how the political process is happening right now. Right. I don't think a Democrat is truly satisfied in Joe Biden. It's like, really? Yeah. Out of all our personalities, that's the best we got. And then the Republican Party is we're down to Trump again. Right. I mean, that we couldn't come up with anything better in the last 4 years.
I hate to say it this way, because we're supposed to be respectful of those in authority overs, but it seems like a clown show.
Yeah. No, it is.
It seems like a clown show, and how did that happen?
But then almost it's such a clown show intentionally, right? Yeah, right. And it's causing not only a malaise but a depression upon America, because I can't remember another time in my life. So I was born in I was born in 75. Yeah. I don't remember Carter. I know about Carter. Yeah. I was my formative years were during Reagan. Yeah. So then I had Reagan and Bush. Yeah. And so then I had Clinton.
And winning the Cold War.
Right. Yeah. So winning the Cold War, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, 9/11. Yeah. But all of those, every other season and I would maybe say even pre-COVID, there was, Americans always generally believed that their best days were in front of them.
Yeah, that's why I said like 1776.
And nowadays people don't. I don't think anyone believes America's best days are in front of her. Right. There's not an optimism.
No, and even like pre-World War II, there were certain people saying we better do this and we better do that. But it's not like today. Today it is a dark cloud where we're just expecting World War III. We're expecting cultural divide. We're expecting a political bomb and explosion where the Constitution isn't going to work for us anymore. People are not going to know it or apply themselves to it or defend it or whatever. And so that is real in society. I think it's good to just recognize that and try to take a different tact at it in the way that we speak about it. And if we happen to be, a generation that ends up, changing, like the 14th and 15th Amendments, that was a result of going through a time of change that changed us in a way that we're not really necessarily pleased with. The Civil War changed us in that it did kind of remove an emphasis on states' rights, right? And so what was originally intended has gotten skewed and morphed through time. Those wars, World War II even, we took American citizens and put them in internment camps because they had Japanese, heritage. And so it's like our best intentions get set aside. And so what scares me is that religious liberty might get set aside, right? Because if a MAGA is viewed as white Christian male or something like that, then all of a sudden that's vilified, and that goes with, you're on the terror list or something like that. And we're not really far from that kind of mindset. So I think it's good to address it so that we can talk about that with those who are abusing it and those who are afraid of it, and make sure that we're carrying ourselves right. Because either way, the church is going to be here, and we're going to have to conduct ourselves in a certain way. We might even suffer through political divide, but it's something that we need to, address and pray about. Well, then I talk about Civil War. When the Trump administration was in, they started talking about Civil War, and when we got to that second election, we had Civil War. It wasn't just political war. We had fire in the streets. We had, at least half a dozen metropolitan areas on fire. We had riots, and we had shootings, and we had deaths because of that. And so then people started really talking about Civil War, and it's being conducted by people on the right now under the Biden administration. And so if the political foment continues to go, more people will feel justified in the concept of civil fraction and civil war. Jason, you're from Texas, and Texas has said to the Biden administration, you can't let all these people across. And so Texas has taken their state militia and basically given them a badge to function as a border patrol. In fact, even right today, the governor has said to Texas authorities, don't let the feds on city property, and don't let them, the immigrants come across. Leave the barbed wire up, and so that there's a battle going on between the feds and the states. And then so Texas says, we're going to send all these people to sanctuary cities, New York City, San Francisco, Chicago, etc. And now these people are saying, you can't do that. That's mean. That's cruel. That's whatever. And it's pitting state against state. Mm-hmm. It's pitting state against state. So,
and it's recreating the north-south divide.
In a way, yeah.
Because the issue is with our southern border.
Yes.
And so it's conservative southern states that are dealing with this.
And I don't want to just pick on Democrats, because I'm hearing Democrats saying immigration is the number one issue. The MAGAs are right on that. Trump's right on that. I mean, I'm hearing a lot of Democrats come out and say that because they realize that's going on. And so, they have to address that. We have Speaker Johnson, who's a known evangelical, known outspoken conservative, and he's trying to battle over this budget and say, we're not funding Ukraine until we fund the border. And he's taken his stand there. But he's under, like I said, the Republican Party's split. The Democratic Party's split. We've got not just two parties, we've got a multiplicity of parties within parties going on. And I, for one, appreciate Texas just taking and saying, we're not against New York. This is your policy. We're just sharing it with you. And they're kind of doing it pithy, tongue-in-cheek in the way that they do it. But, I mean, it's bold. So you got to give it to that governor. He's taken on states, mayors, and the president.
Well, listen, yeah, I mean, Texas is a prime example of a state under invasion, both by immigration and ideology.
Yeah. Because
you have a bunch of West Coast ideology that is coming to Texas that is changing the political dynamic from what it's never, even a Democrat in Texas was a Southern Democrat that was very conservative morally.
A Reagan Democrat.
Right. Yeah, a Reagan Democrat. Yeah, he was very conservative morally.
Yeah.
He
went to church.
Right. He still had those Texan values. Yeah. And a statement like that is like that. What made America great is a state like Texas could have its Texan values. Yeah. And a state like Georgia could have its Georgian values. Right. And a New York state could have its New York values. Michiganders can have their values. Right. And it makes the nation stronger.
Sure. And you can move to whatever state you want.
But that's not anymore.
No. Yeah. No, but that's what I'm saying. We got these interactions that, there's always under the surface, but now they're all just raw. They're all just raw. And certainly, we've always been a nation of immigrants. We want to be a nation of immigrants. We want to let people in who want religious freedom or political freedom or work. We want to do that, but it has to be a legal process. I'm thinking about the division of special interests, of race, of red and blue states. That is, there's a cultural divide there. If you're from New York City, you think all these flyover states are just a bunch of yahoos with guns and Bibles, and that they need to be stopped. They're a threat, and vice versa. People are saying we just need to let California, off the whole continent, altogether. And neither one of those thoughts are viable. It's not right.
It's a fundamental misunderstanding of each other.
Yes.
That makes them dismissive of each other.
I don't know. Do you think that it's like the digital age that has compounded the rhetoric and maybe even the misnomers that people are allowed to say and believe? And
the digital age has allowed us to, to consolidate in our ideas, because all the digital age does is confirm your presuppositions.
Sure.
It doesn't expose you to new ideas.
Right.
Now it is corrupt you.
Yeah.
But so it's the silo of thinking. And so what is fed to you is that which you are already approving of. So thinking is never challenged anymore.
Sure.
Truly.
Yeah. I really think that civil unrest on either side, left or right, can make someone be angry for a generation. Mm-hmm. If you burn down my church, if you burn down my town, if you burn down my family, that's how civil war starts. It gets tribal. And I really feel like we're going tribal, and violence is part of this. And then you wonder about military loyalty. When you read about Rome or, whatever, you read about, this general fought against this general, within, they were both Romans, or they were both, culture this or that. And, I just can't fathom that happening in the United States. These guys all go to the same West Point. They all make the same vows. They all try to take some level of political expediency or neutrality. They all function that way, and yet more and more we're seeing outspoken generals on CNN versus Fox, talking heads. A leftist progressive president or a rightist conservative president picks these guys, and their differences are being shown, and they talk against each other. What if you had, the 101st Airborne and the 1st Army Division, Infantry Division, taken over by different guys, and then all of a sudden you don't have one army, you have two armies. And so I think 2024 shows the vulnerability of these things where we begin to talk about them, and I hope that the Army College has determined how not to have that happen. You know what I mean? The Supreme Court says ultimately we go with the people, and I think the Army would say ultimately go with the people. So it has a chance of going down if the people go down, but there's always going to be people who say no, and that stand up. And so our republic is going to just show its vulnerability, the cracks in 2024. It's a chance for the church to reach out with Christ, minds, hearts and minds, and that being the real idea. And then there's the culture wars, and that's really what we've talked about mostly, about what people feel about the culture, the hearts and minds of Americans. Pleasures and entertainments seem to be more and more. With how many channels are there now? Outlets, web pages. It's infinity of filling your mind with whatever you think you want to fill your mind with. Mm-hmm. Good, bad, and different. Sports is not in and of itself bad, but I just read a statistic that 98 out of the top 100 programs that have been watched on television in the United States have been NFL games. And so nothing necessarily bad in and of itself, except the NFL's become political. And, the NFL has a culture, and it's inclusive, and it's multicultural, and so then it's kind of spreading that ideal as well. And then...
Well, it's one of the few things that is being unanimously watched.
Yes.
So we're watching more content, but the diversity of content is infinite now.
Spread.
Because now it's not based, now content is not held in key by networks.
Sure.
We are our own content distributors right now. Yeah. We're making content. We have our own TV channel called the Bible Nation Society Podcast. Right. And so we are, so the individualization, the selection of what people are watching. And so what makes the NFL unique is that everybody is watching it, that watches all these other individual things.
Yeah. Maybe one of the last...
And we can probably thank Taylor Swift for that.
Yeah, thank you, Taylor Swift. And it might be one of the last bastions where Americans can feel like they can come together. Some are going to kneel at the anthem, and others are going to, wave their hat when the jets fly overhead. So you got this plethora of thought about the United States in there. But again, I think that's why more people can get lost in that. I don't want to think about the elections, so let's just watch football, But it's still kind of a pleasures and entertainments idea. Music, drugs, pornography. We really fall into decadence in culture and ignorance and maybe even apathy. And that's why it's important to continue to talk about the culture and care about the culture, raising your own family in a good culture, affecting your own community. We live in a particular county in Michigan, and that's our Jerusalem, that's our Judea. We care most about the culture, what's going on here. We can insulate ourselves in it, but it spreads everywhere.
Or churches creating their own gospel culture that is distinctive from the world's culture.
Right.
So that the ones that are in, as you would say, seated at the table together, live in a different atmosphere, in a different culture, in a different world that is truly salt and light in the community.
And that's what I think one of the biblical answers is when you universally, within and without, nationally, internationally, left and right, centers. Victor Davis Hanson said the center is unmoored, and everyone feels that, and the church feels that as well. That this ideal of church and home and school and work, that is an area that you're responsible for. You can keep your own private world. You can order your own private world, as the old book by Gordon MacDonald said, and order it unto God and order it unto the gospel. And people are doing that in Soviet Russia, and people are doing that in the deepest, darkest jungles of Africa. Is they're ordering their world in a way that pleases God. And I think it's more important now with the vulnerability of our culture, American culture, that people make sure that they are standing on good, like you said, Bible culture, gospel culture. And that's really what the church is doing. We're trying to save souls. But then when we make them a disciple with other disciples, it's just a culture of the gospel. And I hope pastors see it that way. And that's the best civic duty that they can have is pastor your church unto godliness, and you'll be helping your community. You'll be helping the culture. And then to an extent that we stand together, which I don't think we're necessarily doing that great, we can affect American society.
But Romans who became Christians, who then became Roman Christians and created Roman Christian culture, radically transformed the empire.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Toppled it.
Yes.
And withstood its persecutions.
Yes.
Of Nero and whatnot, because all of a sudden you had Roman Christians who were Roman by nationality, right, or by citizenship, but they weren't acting Roman anymore. They weren't worshiping the Roman gods. They weren't participating in the Roman orgies. They were not doing business as Romans did business, but with integrity. And so now it transformed all the way to the point. Now you get to Constantinople. It says that's the new political group. I gotta. Because he's his day and age Trump. Who co-opted.
Put his finger
right.
in the
That's
wind.
I mean that is it. I mean he is that day and age's Trump of co-opting this movement to realizing they need, and what an example that Christianity and Christians are always in such a desire for the Messiah are willing to accept false messiahs.
And that's another lesson of today with that vulnerability. That we don't compromise in order to try to get something ourselves. Let God do what he's going to do, and let society do. You just, stand firm in that. I think one of the biggest things that shows the vulnerability of our republic in 2024 is the LGBTQ versus religious liberty arguments. And I'm sure that we will podcast more on that. We've already done it. But as that gets into public education, it poisons it. As it gets into the health systems, it poisons our health system in the United States as well. And multiculturalism implies that no one is really right or no one is really best. And so the LGBT community might argue up front, our community is just as good as the religious liberty community or the religious community, implying that none of us is better or none of us is best. And that's what they say until they get power. And then they say they're best and they're better, right? So, it's hypocrisy, the way that they put their foot in the door. And we just need to be more aware of the game that they're playing in that, and stand on the superiority of the gospel culture. I don't know that if someone got to be president that you could litigate that, but if somebody was there as president, they could definitely lead in that through their own personal morality and using what they call it, the bully pulpit of the presidency and the examples, and basically opening the door to aspects of righteousness, even though you couldn't mandate everything. And so these are areas, when I say war 2024, these are areas that aren't shooting wars, but I think that make us vulnerable to where it slips into, shooting wars. And so, I thought we would just kind of slide into the possibility of 2024 bringing about real war. Russian intelligence just this week, a couple days ago, got wind of German plans for World War III. The Germans are planning World War III. They have the German military, they have NATO, and then they have the EU. And then they have capitulation of some sorts. And so, of course, the Russians mock this. They just mock the idea that that's going on. NATO versus Russia. And that's cracking, right? The United States, as part of NATO, is really cracking along with these other wars. And so that's going to affect what the European war is to become. Whether we quit it, whether it stalemates, whether it continues, whether it prolificates. American financial support is in the wind. That makes us vulnerable as well as them. The European Union becomes an alternative to European nations with NATO, and they begin to maybe then lean on German leadership or French leadership. And then how do we, if there's no USA reliability, then Europe is no longer an American ally. It's an American competitor. And so Western culture, Western civilization is in the air. And that's what people are feeling. And of course, the more Putin is under the gun, the more nuclear proliferation can happen, because he said it can happen. We always say, we're careful not to say it, and he's careful to say it. But the vulnerability of our own republic is in doubt in 2024. With NATO, Article 5 mandates that we get involved, boots on the ground, if one of those other NATO countries are there. And we're so close to that with Sweden and Finland and Germany and Poland. There's some in Poland that want to preemptively attack Russia and invoke Article 5. And then Turkey's on the outs. Who do we side with and all that, with Israel and the United States being their arch nemesis. So the cracks and the vulnerabilities seem to encircle the globe, in the issues, particularly there in Europe. Europe is very vulnerable, aka September 1939. It's just there for someone to take advantage of, someone with ambition, or someone with fear. Either way, on either side of that. And then you got the Pacific War, which is not really hot right now. China just got rid of all their generals because there was such corruption. They found out that their ballistic missiles were being, in a fake way, fueled with water because they don't really have the fuel. And so Xi has had to clear out, and the fact that our subs don't work, our missiles don't work, maybe we can't go to Taiwan.
But that's the same thing, right? That's the same thing the Russians found out when they tried to march their army into Ukraine and realized that their tanks had been all replaced with the tires were all rotted because the guy that was supposed to be replacing the tires was taking the money.
If they start fixing their problems, they could become military might. But then what they lean on is nuclear proliferation, because that's all that they have.
Because that's why ultimately a war is a battle between ideologies.
It is civilization.
So even Hitler, and I know we're going to get there, but he fundamentally believed that a nation with such freedoms could not produce ultimate soldiers.
Yes. Yeah.
But then he didn't meet the 101st.
He didn't meet the good old boys.
He didn't meet Easy Company.
That's right.
I just finished my annual watching of that.
Did you?
Yeah, he didn't meet Easy Company.
He didn't know that we had guys like that, and our leadership echelons function differently than Prussian, strict military echelons or whatever. Taiwanese recognition. This next election might determine, the question is going to be asked, is Taiwan independent? They just had an election and elected a pro-independent president who leans with the United States. Now the rhetoric is, let's keep the status quo, but it's getting to where we can't keep the status quo. I mean, the status quo 1973 Nixon layout is getting untenable, and so we're going to be vulnerable in 2024 in that regard.
Well, and I was thinking about that because we are kind of on the back end of a status quo that came with the Cold War, right? The Cold War cooled everything down because the lines were very clear. America versus the United States. We were even making Rocky movies about it. And then our economy finally overwhelmed Russia's economy, and it sends them into the 90s, and they're just in the abyss. They're a non-factor. They're scrounging for our Levi's jeans. I mean, that was the.
I was there, and I was like, these guys are in the 70s. There's no way they can ever compete with us.
So it's just not going to work, right? But then 9/11 opened up a whole new way of introduced to the world a whole new means of vulnerability and attack and of
asymmetrical warfare, political daring,
and of busting up the status quo. And so what have we seen since 9/11? We've seen smaller powers be able to do things that affect the status quo. But our idea that we should maintain status quo is unreasonable. I mean, especially at the speed of technology now, right? And the speed of messaging. So it's really not about we want the world at status quo. What we want is we want the right ideology and ideals and leadership that can navigate changing waters.
You know, no country or ideology could compare with the functionality of the Pentagon until now. Because now you have one little chip on the tip of your finger, and there's as much artificial intelligence to help you maintain warfare with what you've got. And so it makes a small power an equal power. And so we're seeing that more in the Pacific even than anywhere else. But Chinese clock is running out. Their population, bulge was a problem, but now it's shrinking. And so their war age males are limiting the fact of when they can actually have this war and take the status that they want to take. Their economic strain is high. Their military corruption is high. They just basically elected Xi as dictator for life, or he took it. And so their clock for doing something is running out. So that makes me not as worried about the rhetoric in China as in Europe. But I think that leans more to nuclear proliferation rather than boots on the ground warfare.
If they could take Taiwan conventionally, they would have done it already.
Right, absolutely. Yeah.
So the fear then is they're going to do it unconventionally.
Yes.
Which is then sparks.
And one thing you can't underestimate with the Chinese is that they're playing chess. They're playing chess. They're not playing checkers. And so they don't have this. Their leadership does not have the same mindset like we do. Like, it would be a failure to let war come to the shores of the United States. They would do better if war came to the shores of China. They could win if we were there in Vietnam or Korea or whatever. So I think we got to be careful not to play into that. And then the last thing I put here was that the economic or pandemic spark. Did China use pandemic and the economic throes that came after it? Did they use that as soft warfare? I'm kind of a conspiracy theorist, but I would say it makes sense, and they saw how it worked. And so again, we have war not in conventional ideals, but we have it. And thank God there's a great distance across the Pacific Ocean, but that didn't help with pandemic fear, ideology, and economic challenge. So, vulnerability in 2024 comes in that way as well. And then the last thing is just the Middle East war. And I just put it Israel versus everybody, because we say we have Israel's back, and I guess we're backing them, but at the same time, we're kind of holding them back. We're holding their collar, sort of thing. And so they're feeling it, and the rhetoric's getting more angry. And so you have on one side the Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthi, Iranian axis, with a wider war expanding in Lebanon and in the Red Sea. On the other side, you got the Saudi, Egypt, Jordanian, Iraqi interests, and they have a promised scenario. And Netanyahu just came out and said, we don't want to talk to them about that scenario. So it is Israel kind of against everybody. And to me, that has biblical ramifications.
Sure.
When you're getting close to Israel versus everybody.
Well, it has biblical inevitabilities.
Inevitabilities.
Right. Yes. It's not like we're going to set something. It's not like there's a biblical time bomb waiting for us to trip.
Yeah.
No, it's inevitable.
Yes.
It's inevitable.
Yeah.
And so that's why we look at it with a sense of anticipation, because Jesus is coming back.
And really, everybody's trying to not want, everybody in the back of their mind has the biblical Armageddon on their mind. That's just there, and they know it. And everybody's trying to not let that happen, and yet it's kind of masterful to see the people, the events, the circumstances, the global politics, the digital age, the instant media, and see how all those things manipulate together, that no, this is happening. Ain't nobody stopping it. You know,
Right.
that this is
So-
and the devil is manipulating.
So the right maneuver is not to prevent it. The right maneuver is to be on the right side.
To be on the right side, yeah, absolutely. And so, you know, Israel's not perfect as a nation, but it is a promised people. And God said, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And so, I think evangelicals can go overboard, you know, on that as well. People got to realize there's different factions within Israel as well. But the delicate Israeli balance right now, it again shows the vulnerability of our republic in 2024. And who could we sustain a European war, a Pacific war, and a Middle East war? We, after World War II, and we were downgrading, but we were saying we need to have a two-ocean military. And then through the Cold War, we said, well, we need to have this third arm with special forces or with ballistic missiles or whatever. And then after we fought CENTCOM in the Middle East, we said, well, we need to be able to have a three-front war, but we can do it. Well, it seems to me that that's the breaking point. Like, we can't do that. And our enemies know that. And if they could ever get it together, that would make us vulnerable. That we'd have to do that. So that's some of the stuff I think that's gonna be talked about and come up and maybe overwhelm us so fast that we don't have time to talk about it. Like, we all recognize it and see it. So our vulnerability will heighten this year, requiring better Christian church response and a much better civic education training, aka training, and participation. In other words, Christians should not be the group of people that stay at home. They should be people that go and vote. And I hate holding my nose and going in and voting, but I will do that because, you know, otherwise, if you don't have a vote, you're not a free citizen.
But you also don't have to vote for one of the two parties. Just vote.
Absolutely. But here's the thing. There are so many third parties this time.
Yeah.
And I've been part of that. I've been part of third parties and believing in that. But now that's being manipulated by sub-parties within the parties. And always the answer, Pastor Georges, is prayer, godliness, evangelism, right? You always say multiply worship. That's your theme. If you multiply worship by multiplying worshipers, you win people to Jesus Christ. That's the biggest ideological change you're going to have in your life that's going to make you conservative,
right?
That's going to make you culturally strong and get inside that box that you can control, and then everybody inside that box working together. So I thought I would close this up by talking about the Weimar Republic. After Imperial Germany lost World War I, they formed a new republic, right? And so the colonial powers were dissipating, you know, those that had power in Africa and the Orient and all this kind of stuff. And kings and monarchs were dissipating, and so republics were being born even in this period of time. The Weimar Republic, when created, was hailed as one of the most democratic governments in Europe. Despite this, it lasted just 15 years. They had the right idea, right? They had lost, they were humbled, but the strengths and the weaknesses of the republic are discussed below. This is an article from how the Holocaust happened. The strengths were that the republic had many democratic strengths that allowed individual freedoms for everyone. This granted the right to free speech, the right to equality, the right to religion to every German citizen. All adults over the age of 20 could vote. The voting system used proportional representation, a fair system in which parties gained seats in proportion to the number of votes cast for them. More like a parliamentary system. We talked about that in season 3 on the strengths of a parliamentary system and the weaknesses of it versus American bicameral legislature and elections. So this system was used to elect the president and the Reichstag, or the parliament. From 1924 onwards, the republic also had a new currency, and following the implementation of the Dawes Plan, experienced a period of relative economic stability. So it opened up to capitalism, but it was still socialistic to an extent. So this was the grand rebirth of Germany, but it had the same players. It had the same names, right? Just a different constitution, if you will. So the weaknesses were fourfold. The proportional representation was a very democratic electoral system, but it allowed lots of parties to be elected and therefore made it extremely difficult to govern decisively. So number one, party breakups. Multiplicity of parties, multiplicity of coalitions. You think about right now how Speaker Johnson is trying to get some sort of budget thing passed where the border gets taken care of so that Ukraine can get funded. And yet half of his own party says, we're not with you, we're not going to do it. And so this was the political situation of the Weimar Republic. Secondly, in addition, Article 48 of the Constitution gave the president authority to rule by decree and in a state of emergency, bypassing the elected Reichstag. The problem is that nobody had a definition of what was a state of emergency, and therefore it was misused by Hindenburg, eventually allowing Hitler to legally take control of Germany through presidential decree. And what have we had in the last 4 or 5 presidents? We've had presidential decrees getting countermanded by the next president. He does that at the border and in war and with the economy. And so the party breakups lead to more autocratic control out of the quote-unquote elected presidency. And we have that going on today. Thirdly, the reliance on foreign loans following the Dawes Plan led to a severe economic depression. In other words, spend, borrow, interest, print money, tax money, federal debt problem. And we just went over 30-some trillion dollars in debt. So these first 3 downfalls of the Weimar Republic are all present today in our Constitution.
Yeah, and we no longer have a debt-averse party.
Neither
party is debt-averse.
Neither party is adverse to presidential decree,
right,
splitting their own party, or federal debt. Neither one. So finally, many of the old conservative elite who had held key positions of power under the monarchy had continued in similar roles in the Weimar Republic. And so therefore, you had individuals with too much power. Civil servants and bureaucracy had enormous influence and power. The power and influence of the conservative elite would later be crucial in appointing Hitler as chancellor. You no longer have to have the populace. All you have to do is have a few elite. If you have a cabal, you can rule. And I think both presidential personalities are not above doing that. And so the same 4 downfalls of the Weimar Republic that led to fascist dictatorship as a corrective measure is here in the United States. So yes, Biden and progressives and socialistic things are bad for America and the downfall of America, but so would a fascist dictatorial Trump mindset, which they're talking about as being better than Biden. Yeah, it would be better if it was temporary, but Trump is no Washington. And so we have a vulnerable situation in 2024 that requires wisdom, requires at least Christians to insulate themselves with their home, their church, their work, and their school, and make sure that no matter what country or county you live in, that those areas are pinpointed. There is a great book, and this is a book. I'm going to put it up on the video here, and it's called War for Christian Views. This has been printed and reprinted even with other people, so you can get this in many editions. But basically, it shares 4 different views that Christians have on war. One is non-resistance, and that is that Christians can take non-combative roles. And even politically and culturally, Christians say, well, I'm not going to be involved in that. I'll just take this lesser role. Or whatever. I'm not going to run for office. I'll just do this. The second one was Christian pacifism, which was total non-participation, kind of Gandhi-like, right? The third was just war, which is defensive only. We'll just stand up and vote only when we have to. We'll participate or speak only when we're under the gun. And then the last one was preemptive war, offensive war to avoid wider wars. And we have equally people overdoing that. So even though we have these 4 views that are relegated in a book like this, that have scripture and verse to them, ideals, that splits the Christian perspective into 4. And so you have to understand that your Christian friends, Christian family, are going to have multiple responses in time. Don't let that split your family, as best as possible. Keep your family together. Understand those different perspectives. Find what's right and wrong with those different perspectives. The best quote in here is at the very end, and it's by William Jennings Bryan. He was a Christian statesman, 18 and 1900s, 4-time Democratic nominee to the presidency of the United States. He lost all 4 times. He was the guy that successfully argued the Scopes monkey trial against evolution. He actually won that trial, even though people say that's why we have evolution in the schools. So he was a wonderful, outstanding Christian statesman. He said this: no one disputes the validity of the commandments against killing, stealing, bearing false witness, and covetousness when applied to individuals. But these commandments are not sufficiently applied to the large groups called nations. Because they are not applied, there is no standard of morals which can be authoritatively invoked for the regulation of international affairs. We're trying, but it doesn't work. Men whose consciences would not permit them to take a neighbor's life as an individual act think it entirely proper to take life by wholesale, either through those whom they command or at the command of others, and that too without regard to the cause of the war. Men who would not think of stealing from a neighbor are taught to believe that it is patriotic to defend the taking of territory. if their nation gains by the act. Men who would shrink from slandering a neighbor seem to feel no compunctions of conscience when they misrepresent the purposes and plans of other nations. And covetousness, which is regarded as sinful in the individual, seems to be transformed into virtue when it infects a nation. This attempt to limit the application of these commandments to small transactions has cost an enormous quantity of blood and has brought confusion into international councils. And the book concludes, it is time we give these commandments a worldwide scope. Individuals who follow the Prince of Peace must be in the forefront of those who work to apply the principles of love and justice, not only to individuals, but to nations as well. In other words, our penchant is for peace, for love. You know, we sent a man to Dearborn to minister to Muslims, even though, you know, in their minds we're mortal enemies. And so that has to be our first take. I probably lean more towards just or defensive war.
Well, yeah, I would rebuttal him by saying, looking at put America's wars in the filter of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have preemptive war in order to save lives.
Sure.
Making the calculation. But then the very nations we destroyed, we rebuilt them and gave it back to them. So there is a Japan. Yeah. We didn't take over Japan.
Right.
There's Japan. We didn't take over Germany. Right. Now it's looking again like they're going to be. There's the potential for Germany to be the problem again. But even in our own virtue, we did not absorb Germany into our.
We didn't even make the mistakes of the British Empire.
Right.
You know, we came out of it, so we weren't conquering and making colonies out of things.
Right.
In the same way, and we didn't do what Japan and Germany did in absolute control. And so, but that was because we had Christian sentimentality.
Right.
We had guys like this saying, "Hey, let's do warfare differently."
Right.
And I don't know that he was a total pacifist, but he was just saying, "Let's not apply something to ourselves and then not apply it to us working as a nation." And to me, that's kind of what Bible Nation is all about. And the biblical principles are the best way to lead a nation. We like to say the best culture is a Bible culture. It's proven and it works. And so this year we're going to be addressing many different issues on the vulnerability of our republic in 2024. War 2024. Pastor Jay, I'm going to give you kind of final thing. Talk to pastors who basically have to address their congregations each week. Some will avoid every topic altogether, and some might overwhelmingly, try to champion every topic every Sunday. What is a balance for a pastor?
Well, I don't know if there's a balance per se. I think there's just be the salt. So the verse I was thinking about as we were going through this and talking about the vulnerability and the culture war and all that is because the more I wrote this down. Let me come back to my statement that I wrote down.
Well,
No, I got it. We are vulnerable as churches. We are more vulnerable as churches as we bow down to more relativism.
Yeah.
I was trying to find another B word. Couldn't work. But the more we bow down to that, to assimilate, I mean, we are then tethering ourselves to this world that is sinking. And so the idea, what's Christ's command to the church, what's Christ's command to pastors is, ye are the salt of the earth. But if the salt have lost its savor, wherein shall it be salted? Yeah. It is thenceforth good for nothing but to be cast out and to be trodden under foot of men. Ye are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hid. Neither do men light a candle and put it under a bushel, but on a candlestick, and it giveth light unto all that are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. Yeah. So Christ is saying, how shall they know you that you're my disciples, that you love one another? Yeah. But that love is then manifested in good works. Yeah. Because they can't see your heart, they can see the outside. And so here, this gospel community is supposed to be the city. Reagan's vision for a nation was really the Bible's vision for a church. Yeah. We're supposed to be a city set on a hill. Yeah. Now a nation full of churches like that now becomes a lighthouse.
That's what we were.
That's what we're talking about. Bible Nation Society. Right. We're not talking about a theocracy.
It's not a social gospel.
Nor are we talking about a theocracy.
No, right.
We're not talking about government mandated religion. Right. We're talking about a culture, a society that is so full of salt and light churches that in and of itself is a light unto the world. Yeah. And even that term of salt and light is being co-opted into sort of a cultural pacifism that is not what Christ is intending here. Christ is talking about the abrasive.
It's not a sissified sandal wearing
poet. It's not beware and warn against the Jesus stupid people,
Right.
salt and light.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
not that type of global thinking.
Right.
If I can throw all the terms
Yeah.
out here
Yeah.
for those that know.
Yeah.
No, it is a salt and light
Yeah.
that proclaims the word of God, that runs in the face of the culture.
I mean, John the Baptist, be salty, be
It's-
shiny,
Right.
be salty, be shiny, and then let come what may.
It's the same salt and light that Jonah didn't want to be.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that changed Nineveh for a season.
And Paul, you're preaching on Philippians this
Right.
year, and Paul there, he keeps saying, I'm in jail, I might be suffering and all these kinds of things, but that's what I'm called to do. I'm called to live or die, but I'm going to preach the gospel. And if me preaching the gospel has other people even preach it in contempt, nevertheless, it's preached. I'm being salty and shiny enough that other people are doing it for a bunch of different reasons, but nevertheless, the gospel element is.
And so he said, I rejoice.
So I'm rejoicing in it.
I rejoice.
So we're in a dark cloud.
Yeah.
There's a vulnerability in our republic in 2024. But I think Pastor Georges is saying to pastors, hey, keep rejoicing, be salty, be shiny. Don't let this incrementalism keep taking over the church or the churches, right? Stand tall, stand strong. Ultimately we win. And we're getting to the finish line. And that's what we're talking about here. Make sure that you subscribe, wherever you listen to podcasts or on YouTube, and BibleNation.org. There's all kinds of information there. You can communicate with us on that. We'd like to hear from you in our podcast. We'd like to welcome our new producer, Jackson Lee. Jackson, good to have you. And you didn't say anything during this podcast, but we want you to know that if there's something that you want to say, think twice about it and then say it. Thanks for watching Bible Nation Society, BibleNation.org. Until next time.